This is CBN NewsWatch.
And thanks for joining us for CBN News Watch for this Monday, November 11th, Veterans Day. I am Heather Sells. Former UN Ambassador Nikki Haley is accusing two former administration officials in the West Wing of resisting President Trump and his policies. The accusation comes in her new memoir. Mark Martin joins us now with more. Mark, what do we know?
Heather, Haley alleges then Secretary of State Rex Tillerson and then White House Chief of Staff John Kelly tried to get her to join a revolt against the policies of President Donald Trump. Haley says Tillerson and Kelly, who were ultimately pushed out by Trump, were following a dangerous path. In her book, she writes the two told her they were not being insubordinate, but believed it was their decisions, not the president's, that were in the best interests of the country. She spoke about the incident to CBS.
It definitely happened?
It absolutely happened. And instead of saying that to me, they should have been saying that to the president, not asking me to join them on their sidebar plan. It should have been, go tell the president what your differences are and quit if you don't like what he's doing. But to undermine a president is really a very dangerous thing.
Kelly responded saying that what Haley terms resistance, he called a process to help the president make an informed decision. The Washington Post says Tillerson has declined to comment on Haley's allegation. And as the Democrats are taking their impeachment hearings public this week, Haley says she does not believe they'll succeed.
No, on what? You're going to impeach a president for asking for a favor that didn't happen and giving money and it wasn't withheld? I don't know what you would impeach him on. I mean, look, Nora, impeachment is like the death penalty for a public official. When you look at the transcript, there's nothing in that transcript that warrants the death penalty for the president.
The televised hearings begin Wednesday. Expected to appear is William Taylor, a former diplomat to Ukraine, who testified earlier that millions in military aid would be withheld unless there was an investigation into the president's political rivals. Democrats have shut down Republican requests to hear from former Vice President Joe Biden's son, Hunter Biden, who was hired and paid millions by a Ukrainian energy company in what some suspect was a quid pro quo with the Obama White House. Meanwhile, CBS News reports that Haley says she has no immediate plans to run for any office, including the presidency. Back to you, Heather.
Thanks, Mark. And I spoke with conservative radio host and commentator Todd Starnes earlier about the Haley book and its bombshells. Todd, what are your thoughts on Nikki Haley's new book? Did we see these revelations coming?
Oh, Nikki Haley wants to be the next president of the United States after Donald Trump. This is a really fascinating thing that's happened. The book is pretty explosive. Not only does she defend President Trump, but she also calls him out for those big issues where they had differences as well. So she's trying to thread the needle here, as they say, inside the Beltway. Now, there are a couple of interesting things to point out in this book that the Washington Post got an advance copy of. First, I think it's worth remembering that the so-called swamp in Washington, D.C. is populated with a lot of rhinos, Republicans name only. So I'm not surprised to hear the news that the former Secretary of State Rex Tillerson and the former White House Chief of Staff John Kelly were actually colluding behind the president's back to try and thwart his agenda.
Yeah, it's really a fascinating picture that she paints of that going on. Talk about the way she distinguishes herself from the president. What issues is she looking to break away from him on?
So look, Nikki Haley is the child of immigrants coming here from India, and she certainly has a different perspective. That being said, she certainly called out the president for his handling of the Charlottesville, Virginia issue. When she was governor of South Carolina, that was a big issue, race relations in the state of South Carolina. So I'm not surprised to see her really separating herself from the president on that particular issue. For me, the bigger story is that she was really calling out the former Secretary of State and the former White House Chief of Staff. And I think she was absolutely correct. It is really beyond shocking that such high-level administration officials were working behind the scenes to stop the president's agenda. That is something that needs to be called out.
How do you think that might play out in D.C. Going forward this week, especially?
Well, look, I think it's a reminder that there are a lot of people in the so-called deep state who were trying to sabotage this president and his agenda. But beyond that, this serves as a great reminder for all of the gun-toting, Bible-clinging deplorables out there, a reminder that there really are people within the Republican Party who do not support this president's agenda. It's not necessarily President Trump the man, it's President Trump's agenda. Again, going back to this issue that you had the former Secretary of State, you had the former White House Chief of Staff trying to stop this president from moving the embassy in Israel to Jerusalem. That is a shocking thing, and it should serve as a wake-up call for folks. Understand this. There are people in Washington within the president's own party who want to take him down.
All right, and just to quickly highlight, I was not aware of that. So they were colluding, coming together to try and stop the moving of that embassy. Is that correct?
So those are the allegations that are in the book, as reported by the Washington Post, that among the things that they tried to do, Tillerson and Kelly, they tried to stop the president pulling out of the Paris Climate Accord. They tried to stop the president from getting rid of the nuclear agreement with Iran. And for me, the bombshell is that they tried to stop the president from moving the embassy in Israel to Jerusalem. That is all you need to know about those rhinos in the White House.
All right. Well, definitely sounds like an interesting book. Todd Starnes, thanks for your insights.
Thank you.
Today, Veterans Day celebrations marked America's thankfulness and pride in the military men and women who serve our country. President Trump attended a huge parade in New York along with the First Lady.
Today we come together as one nation to salute the veterans of the United States Armed Forces, the greatest warriors to ever walk the face of the earth. Our veterans risked everything for us. Now it is our duty to serve and protect them every single day of our lives.
Trump is the first sitting president to speak at this parade on the 100th anniversary of it. It is organized by the United War Veterans Council in Madison Square Park. Well, in the high school sports world right now, the issue of transgender athletes is becoming a challenge, especially for the female athletes forced to compete against boys who identify as girls. It's also becoming a political issue and a campaign issue. Here is a clip of an ad that ran in Kentucky this fall prior to last week's election for the governor's seat.
All female athletes want is a fair shot in competition, at a scholarship, at a title, at victory. What if that shot was taken away by a competitor who claims they're a girl but was born a boy?
And to tell us more about the transgender sports issue in the political world is Terry Schilling, the executive director of the American Principles Project Foundation, a conservative think tank and political advocacy organization. Terry, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
You used the transgender sports issue in the Kentucky governor's race this fall. Why did you decide to highlight that particular issue?
Well, it's one of the issues that we believe that the Democratic Party and progressives across the country have really gone out of their minds on. They've really stepped outside of where the American people are. And so we want to take issues where the Democrats and the left-wing progressives are on their weakest grounds. And we thought that letting boys identify as girls and compete against girls in sports was one of those weakest grounds. And we found that that actually was the case.
All right, we don't have the official results yet from that Kentucky governor's race, but I want to ask you, do you think it made a difference, this issue?
Absolutely. You know, you look at the numbers and you look at Governor Matt Bevin, he took on so many courageous fights. You know, he was down by about 8 to 10 points, depending on which poll you looked at. Prior to us getting engaged, he was consistently ranked one of the most unpopular governors in the country. And he ended up finishing the race within less than 5,000 votes. And with our ads, we contacted well over 375,000 moderate to progressive voters who were persuadable on this issue. So I think it definitely had an impact on the race. And it's just a matter of time before we're able to produce the numbers on how many votes we actually did shift.
What is it about this particular issue that you think is resonating with those independent voters?
I think there's a general sense of unfairness. Look, when we're discussing issues pertaining to the LGBT movement, it tends to be brought up in terms of equality and fairness. And I think that most Americans and most people in general understand that men and boys have an unfair athletic advantage over girls. And so when it comes to whether or not to, let boys identify as girls and compete against them in sports, I think people just know that it's an unfair advantage. And that it shouldn't be allowed.
What do you think about for 2020? Are you expecting to hear from more candidates who want to use this particular issue?
Absolutely. And quite frankly, part of the reason why we brought this up is because we've already seen national leaders such as Donald Trump Jr. and several others bring this up as, something that's very unfair that's going on and something that's quite frankly kind of crazy. We're looking forward to using this issue in really important elections such as Michigan and Georgia, North Carolina. These states are going to be crucial not just to the presidency, but also to keeping the Senate. And the voters there are very normal, they're very fair-minded, and they're going to be voting on issues like this, and we're very excited for 2020 to come.
Well, it's going to be a fascinating political year, that's for sure. Terry Schilling with the American Principles Project Foundation, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Well, many people are gearing up right now for some sub-freezing temperatures. They're expected to hit more than half the country this week. North Dakota already saw 7 inches of snow over the weekend. That system is now moving into Chicago, causing a stressful day for drivers there. And that'll be followed by Arctic air bringing bitter winter chill and more snow.
This is brutal cold coming. There's no question about it. Big snowstorm for this time of the year from the Midwest into the interior Northeast. And you're probably going to see snow, at least in the air, all the way down to Virginia Beach tomorrow evening. That's how strong this cold air mass is.
Cold will also dip into the deep south this week. With the wind chill, temperatures will feel like the 20s in places as far south as Texas. As many as 148 daily records could be broken or tied this week. The high in Dallas is expected to be 44 degrees Tuesday. That is 24 degrees lower than normal. Coming up this Veterans Day, as the story of the Battle of Midway is on the big screen, we will talk with one historian about the significance of it and why a pilot who fought in it said, "Never call me a hero."
Life is better with a good night's sleep. Get your free DVD or booklet of Protect Your Sleep as the world watches from the outside.
It's a big diplomatic tug of war here in the Middle East.
Go inside the story with Jerusalem Dateline.
Israeli archaeologists are talking about a discovery that could change the thinking about the Temple Mount.
Join CBN Jerusalem Bureau Chief Chris Mitchell and get the biblical perspective on the events shaping the world.
What starts in Israel then ends up going to other places.
Watch Jerusalem Dateline Friday night at 9:30 on the CBN News Channel.
Life. It's meant to be lived fully. Jesus said it. I came to give you life. Life to the fullest. Life in your family. Life in your finances. Life in your body, mind, and spirit. Life in your everyday. At CBN.com, we're taking what Jesus said seriously. We're here to help you discover life. Life. Live it fully. CBN.com.
Today is Veterans Day, and a lot of people are talking about a new movie on the Battle of Midway. The battle is considered one of the turning points of the Pacific Theater in World War II. One of the heroes of that battle was a man of faith, a pilot named Jack Cleese, and he's featured tonight in a Smithsonian Channel episode about the battle. Historian Timothy Orr wrote a book about Cleese called Never Call Me a Hero, and he joins us now with a look at his life. Dr. Orr, thanks a lot for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So there's some different views about this battle and really what caused it to be so successful for our country. Cleese argued that it was more than just luck. Tell us about his view.
Yeah, that's correct. So the first theory about the Battle of Midway, which was proposed back in the 1960s, is that the only reason that Americans won is because luck was on their side. As Cleese argued throughout his life, he said it was more than just luck. It was about the skill, the training that went into preparing American aviators to fight the war. And he says it was all due to his friends, his fellow pilots, how they won the battle.
All right, and I understand that Cleese was significant in the battle as well. What did he do, and what did his friends do that was so significant?
Well, Cleese was part of a dive bomber squadron, and that is a type of aircraft that flies up to about 4 miles high. And when they come above an enemy ship, they nose downward, and they plummet towards the Earth at about 275 miles an hour. And then when they reach their release altitude, about 1,500 feet, they drop their bomb, sustain about an 8 or 9 G pullout, and then hope that they have struck the enemy ship they're aiming for. And so Cleese is part of the contingent that destroys the Japanese aircraft carriers on June 4th, 1942. He is responsible for hitting 3 Japanese ships during the battle. He is the only American pilot to have such a high hit ratio during the engagement.
Oh, wow. And I was reading that he died in 2016 at the age of 100. Incredible. And that he was the second to last Navy pilot from the battle, still alive at the time. You have said that he was a person of deep faith and that his mission, one of his missions he felt like at the end of the life was really to tell his story and his view of this battle. Tell us more about who he was.
Yeah, I mean, he was a deeply religious person. He converted to Catholicism during the war, married a Catholic woman from California. And one of the things that was very difficult for Dusty in the later years of his life was trying to understand why so many of his friends had perished during the battle, and yet he was left behind to carry on the story. And his solution, what he decided through prayer, was ultimately that he thought God had given him one final mission. That was to live long enough to tell the story so that Americans could remember those who made the ultimate sacrifice in June of 1942.
So powerful. And what's incredible, too, is to think back in time. This was just 6 months or so after Pearl Harbor. So the nation, of course, was just feeling, that effect. Talk about how significant this Battle of Midway was to the war at that point in time.
Well, you said it. The Battle of Midway was a turning point. So at the time, Japan was winning a sweeping host of victories across the Western Pacific. They had clobbered the American fleet at Pearl Harbor. They were surrounding the American army in the Philippines. They had taken the American possessions of Guam and Wake Island. It was a slew of Japanese victories. And to use maybe a sports metaphor, you would say that Japan was on the 5-yard line ready for the goal. And so the Americans had to win a victory, and Midway was their last opportunity to do it, to stop the Japanese onslaught. Because, quite frankly, if the Japanese Navy had taken Midway Atoll, it is likely that their next target would have been Hawaii. And if they had knocked Hawaii out of the war, the U.S. could not have carried on a war in the Pacific and would have changed world history, most likely for the worst.
Incredible. And you've got a copy of the book that you wrote about Cleese, and he apparently said, "Never call me a hero."
Yeah, he was a very modest individual. He said the only heroes from World War II were those who perished. He was simply among the lucky few who lived long enough to survive and tell the tale. So he frequently told us, "Never call me a hero, only a lucky fool."
Dr. Orr, thanks for your time and your work.
Thank you so much.
Still ahead, an unbelievable story. The husband of one of the women killed by a Mexican drug cartel talks about forgiveness.
On October 1st, 1961, history was made when a tiny station began transmitting the first signals of the Christian Broadcasting Network.
CBN, the Christian Broadcasting Network.
And now, a new era has begun with the all-new CBN News Channel.
Just moments ago, the Iron Dome intercepted an incoming rocket right on the Gaza border.
And ministering in this area, spiritual warfare is definitely involved.
a 24/7 news network, bringing you the news you want from a source you can trust.
In Kenya, 40% of the medical services are actually provided by these Christian hospitals.
Let's talk about the economy.
Believers here are joining together to win people to Jesus Christ.
All your favorite shows now in one place. Go to CBNNewsChannel.com to find out how to get the CBN News Channel on your TV all day, every day. CBN News. Life is better with a good night's sleep. Get your free DVD or booklet of Protect Your Sleep today.
Life. It's meant to be lived fully. Jesus said it. I came to give you life. Life to the fullest. Life in your family. Life in your finances. Life in your body, mind, and spirit. Life in your everyday. At CBN.com, we're taking what Jesus said seriously. We're here to help you discover life. Life. Live it fully. CBN.com.
A father talks about forgiveness following the deaths of his wife and 2 children. They were among those killed last week in Mexico, apparently by a drug cartel. Dan Andros with FaithWire.com joins us with a story. Welcome, Dan.
Yeah, thank you.
Dan, this story from the beginning is heartbreaking, and it gets even more so as this husband and father speaks out. Tell us what happened.
Yeah, well, we were kind of waiting for the dads and the husbands to speak out because when we were reading this story the first time, it was glaring that it was the women and the children who seemed to be the only ones in this caravan of SUVs of multiple families that were driving across Mexico. And so this dad came out and spoke for the first time to the media. His name is David Langford. And yeah, he spoke about forgiveness off the bat. And his quote was, "I believe in forgiveness, but I also believe in justice, and forgiveness doesn't rob justice." And then he said, "Unfortunately, you don't get justice too much in Mexico." And the authorities right now say they don't have any arrests. They don't have any leads at this point. They're still looking for that. And in that area where this horrific attack happened, there's heavy drug cartel presence. And they said 70 to 80% of the homicides, which they happen multiple of them every single day in this area, go unsolved.
Oh, wow. So really a feeling of powerlessness there. Well, in another story that I think a lot of people have been following, and you have, John Crist, what has happened since sexual misconduct allegations came out against this Christian comedian?
Yeah, well, this was a stunning revelation made by Charisma News in a report that they had released last week. And Crist himself announced that he was canceling the rest of his tour to seek the help that he needed to get, and that he had been admittedly trying to get over the last couple of years unsuccessfully. But there were other ramifications as well, including Netflix. He had just landed a big special on Netflix. He had talked about how this was a huge career goal of his as a comedian to get his own special on Netflix. And at this point, they've pulled it. You can't find it on the site anymore. And they said that they're holding it now in light of these allegations. And what's interesting is the reaction that we've seen from the Christian community since this news broke. I think the overwhelming majority that we've seen on our page and on CBN's page as well has been just an extension of grace and saying, hey, look, everybody's got their own struggles. He's admitted it. He's owning it. But we've seen the other end of that spectrum as well, of people saying, like, wait a minute, this behavior has been going on for a long time and he was enabled, and somebody, there needs to be some sort of recompense for this. And Christian blogger Heidi St. John said that his career should be over because she said his behavior, the pattern of it was quote unquote predatory. So there's still a lot of discussion around that. And I mean, I think the one thing we can all agree on is that everybody involved in that situation definitely needs our prayer.
Right. And just briefly, what's happening tonight on Faith and Culture?
Yeah, we're breaking down what happens when your miracle doesn't happen, right? We have, as Christians, we're always praying for the thing that we want to happen, for the miracles, and God often grants those, and he does so in dramatic ways. But what happens when it doesn't happen? And so we sort of dive into, as Christians, how we should have a posture of remembering that it's his will above ours. So we dive into that one in a little bit more depth.
Okay, thank you, Dan. And you can watch the latest Faith versus Culture with Dan and Dale Partridge tonight on the CBN News Channel. Coming up, it happened early in Tim Tebow's football career. We'll have cornerstone journey story of the athlete and his faith in a viral video milestone that has gone well into the millions.
Life is better with a good night's sleep. Get your free DVD or booklet of Protect Your Sleep today.
I'm Ephraim Graham, and this is Studio 5. Cruise with me as I discover the good things happening in the world of music, sports, television, and movies.
The fact that Ryan Coogler was going to be directing the film, I knew that something special was going to happen.
We'll chat with artists at the forefront of entertainment and explore the connection between popular culture and faith.
I asked my pastor, I said, well, does that mean I'm supposed to be a preacher? He says, well, no, you already have a pulpit.
Watch Studio 5 Wednesday night at 9:30.
Remember for a moment what it was like to be a child. You believed every story you were told. You saw a world full of endless possibilities. What stories will the world's orphaned and at-risk children believe? We believe the Bible tells the only story truly worth believing. We believe that every child should have the opportunity to dream, the chance to take challenges and turn them into possibilities, the chance to stand on the promises of God, to recognize their place in the greatest story ever told. They have their whole lives ahead of them. Theirs is a world of endless possibilities. They are looking for a story to believe. We will tell them that story. Will you join us?
Tim Tebow and his dedication to the gospel hits a milestone. A video of him telling the story behind him wearing verses like John 3:16 in the black mark under his eyes in college and pro ball has now reached 9 million views. What started out in college transitioned into his time in the pros, and something amazing happened in a playoff game several years ago where the Broncos beat the Pittsburgh Steelers. His PR guy told him exactly 3 years from the time he put John 3:16 under his eyes. In this game, he threw 316 yards. His yards per rush were 3.16, and yards per completion were 31.6. Time of possession was 31.06, and the ratings for the night were 31.6. And during the game, 90 million people Googled John 3:16, and that was the #1 trending social media topic at the time. Well, you can find Tebow's full story on CBNnews.com. And that is it for this edition of CBN News Watch. So remember, you can find more of our news programs on the CBN News Channel anytime or online with CBNnews.com. Also, please do tell us what you think about the stories that you've seen by emailing newswatch@cbn.com or talk to us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We hope you'll join us next time. Have a great day.